The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of Kensington Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked through the grand hallways. His school bag hung loosely over his shoulder, and his shoes made soft clicking sounds on the marble floor. Today was different from other days, though George didn't know it yet. As he turned the corner near the main entrance, he noticed something unusual. One of the royal guards, a tall man with graying hair at his temples, was standing at his post but seemed troubled. The guard's name was James Mitchell, and he had been protecting the royal family for over 15 years. His uniform was perfectly pressed as always, his posture straight and professional, but George's young eyes caught something others might miss. James was trying hard to hide the fact that his hands were shaking slightly. His breathing seemed labored, and tiny beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool morning air. The guard kept blinking rapidly as if trying to clear his vision, but he remained at his post with unwavering dedication. Prince George had always been taught to notice people around him. His parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, had raised him to understand that everyone who worked at the palace was important and deserved respect. Unlike many children his age, George had developed a special awareness of the people who served his family. The young prince slowed his pace as he approached the guard. He had seen James many times before during his walks through the palace. The guard had always stood perfectly still like a statue, but had occasionally offered George a subtle smile when no one was looking. Those small moments had created a quiet bond between them. Something about James's appearance this morning made George feel worried. The boy's instincts told him that the guard was not feeling well, even though James was trying his best to hide it. George remembered his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, telling him that true leadership meant caring for others, especially those who served with loyalty and dedication. As George got closer, he could see that James's face was pale, and his jaw was clenched as if he was fighting against some kind of discomfort. The guard's eyes remained focused straight ahead, following protocol, but George noticed they seemed glassy and unfocused. The palace bustled with its usual morning activity. Other staff members hurried past, busy with their daily duties. Palace officials moved through the corridors discussing important matters. Security personnel maintained their watchful presence throughout the building. But in all this activity, no one else seemed to notice that James was struggling. Prince George stopped walking completely. His young mind processed what he was seeing, and his heart told him that he needed to do something. He had been taught that with privilege comes responsibility, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is show simple human kindness. The boy looked around and saw that several other palace staff members were nearby. He knew that his next actions would be witnessed by many people, but that didn't matter to him. What mattered was that someone who had dedicated years of his life to protecting George's family was clearly in distress. George took a deep breath and made a decision that would change James's life forever. He stepped directly in front of the guard, breaking the formal protocol that usually governed interactions between royalty and palace staff. His young face showed genuine concern and determination. "Sir," George said softly, looking up at James with worried eyes, "are you feeling all right? You look like you might need to sit down." James's training told him to remain at attention and not engage in conversation during his duty hours, but the sincere concern in the young prince's voice touched something deep in his heart. For a moment, his professional composure wavered, and the pain he had been hiding became visible on his face. The guard's dedication to his duty warred with his body's distress, creating an internal conflict that was written across his features. George saw this struggle and understood that sometimes rules needed to be set aside for something more important than protocol. James Mitchell felt his heart skip a beat, and not because of his medical condition. The young prince standing before him had just shown more concern for his well-being than many people had in years. The guard's eyes met George's for a brief moment, and in that instant, both of them understood that something significant was happening. "Your Royal Highness," James managed to say, his voice slightly strained. I'm fine, thank you for asking." But even as he spoke the words, his body betrayed him. A sharp pain shot through his chest, causing him to wince slightly. His breathing became more shallow, and he gripped his ceremonial weapon a little tighter to steady himself. Prince George was not fooled by the guard's brave words. His young eyes saw through the facade of strength that James was trying to maintain. The boy had spent enough time around adults to recognize when someone was putting on a brave face while suffering inside. "You don't look fine," George said, with the honest directness that only children possess. "My grandmother always says that pretending to be strong when you're not is actually a kind of weakness. She says real strength is knowing when to ask for help." These words hit James like a gentle wave. In his 15 years of service, he had never heard such wisdom from someone so young. The guard had been taught that his job was to be invisible, to blend into the background while ensuring the safety of the royal family. He had never expected one of them to see him as a person who might need care himself. Other palace staff members had begun to notice the unusual interaction between the prince and the guard. Some whispered among themselves, wondering if they should intervene. Others watched with curiosity, sensing that something important was unfolding before their eyes. George noticed the growing attention, but didn't let it distract him from his concern for James. The boy had inherited his mother's compassionate nature and his father's sense of duty. These qualities combined in him to create a young person who understood that real nobility came from how you treated others, not from titles or ceremony. "When did you last eat something?" George asked, surprising everyone within earshot with his mature question. "Sometimes my mum gets shaky when she hasn't eaten, and she says her head feels funny." James was taken aback by the prince's perceptiveness. The truth was that he had been feeling unwell for several days, but had been afraid to report it. He worried that taking sick leave might be seen as weakness or laziness. He had a family to support and couldn't afford to lose his position. So he had been pushing through, hoping his condition would improve on its own. "I had breakfast, Your Highness," James replied, though his voice lacked conviction. What he didn't say was that he had barely been able to keep anything down for the past 2 days, and his breakfast had consisted of only a few sips of tea. George studied the guard's face with the intensity of someone much older. He could see the honesty struggling with the duty in James's expression. The boy understood that adults often felt they had to hide their problems, especially when their jobs depended on appearing strong and capable. "My father says that the people who work here are like family," George continued, his voice gaining confidence, "and families take care of each other. If you were my uncle or my grandfather, I would want you to sit down and rest." The simplicity and sincerity of these words created a moment of profound silence in the busy corridor. James felt tears threatening to form in his eyes, moved by the young prince's genuine care. He had spent so many years being treated as part of the furniture that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a human being with needs and feelings. Palace protocol had no guidelines for this situation. The manuals covered security procedures, ceremonial duties, and emergency responses, but nowhere was there instruction on how to handle a member of the royal family showing personal concern for a guard's health. George took a small step closer to James, lowering his voice so their conversation became more private, despite the attention they were receiving. "I know you're supposed to stand here and protect us," the boy said. "But who protects you when you need protecting?" This question struck James at his core. In all his years of service, no one had ever asked him that. He had been so focused on his duty to others that he had forgotten he also had a duty to himself and to his own family who depended on him. Prince George could see that his words had touched something deep inside the guard. James's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack, revealing the vulnerable human being beneath the uniform. The boy sensed that this was a crucial moment, one that required both gentleness and determination. "Please," George said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm not ordering you as a prince. I'm asking you as someone who cares about you. Will you please sit down for just a minute?" The word "please" from a member of the royal family was almost unheard of in formal palace interactions. Guards were given commands and instructions, not polite requests. James felt his resolve wavering as he looked down at this remarkable young person who seemed to understand human kindness better than many adults. Several palace staff members had now gathered at a respectful distance, watching this unprecedented scene unfold. Among them was Mrs. Patricia Williams, the head housekeeper, who had worked at the palace for 25 years. She recognized the significance of what she was witnessing and felt a mixture of pride and amazement at the young prince's behavior. George noticed his school bag was still on his shoulder and slowly removed it, setting it down on the floor. This simple action sent a clear message to everyone watching. He was not in a hurry to leave, and James's well-being was more important than keeping to schedules. "I know there are rules about standing at your post," George continued. But I think there are bigger rules about taking care of people. My mother taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone when they need it, even if it's not convenient. James felt his chest tighten, but this time it wasn't from physical pain. The young prince's words reminded him of why he had originally wanted to serve the royal family. He had been drawn to their service not just for the job security, but because he believed in the values they represented: duty, honor, and care for others. "Your Highness," James said, his voice becoming slightly emotional, I have been feeling unwell, but I didn't want to abandon my post. My duty is to protect you and your family. George's face brightened with understanding. But you can't protect us very well if you're not feeling good, can you? And we can't let someone we care about suffer just to follow rules that don't make sense when people are hurting. The logic was simple and undeniable. James realized that his determination to push through his illness could actually compromise his ability to do his job effectively. If he collapsed while on duty, it would create a security concern and potentially put the royal family at risk. Besides, George added with a small smile, there are lots of other guards here. You're not the only one keeping us safe, and I bet they would all want you to take care of yourself too. As if to prove George's point, another guard who had been watching from nearby stepped forward. The lad's right, James, he said quietly. We've all been worried about you the past few days. You've been looking poorly, but none of us wanted to say anything. This revelation surprised James. He had thought he was successfully hiding his condition, but apparently his colleagues had noticed and been concerned. The realization that people cared about him added another layer of emotion to an already overwhelming moment. George sensed that James was beginning to accept help, but he also understood that the guard needed to save face. Adults, the boy had learned, often needed to feel like they were making their own decisions rather than being forced into something. Maybe you could just lean against the wall for a moment, George suggested. That way you're still at your post, but you're also taking care of yourself. It would make me feel much better knowing you're okay. This compromise was brilliant in its simplicity. It allowed James to maintain his sense of duty while also acknowledging his human needs. The guard looked around at the faces of his colleagues and saw only concern and support, no judgment or criticism. Mrs. Williams stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered. Perhaps I could bring you a chair and a glass of water, James? She offered kindly. And maybe something light to eat? The circle of care was expanding. What had started as one young boy's concern for a guard was becoming a community of palace staff looking out for one of their own. James felt overwhelmed by this outpouring of kindness, something he hadn't experienced in his years of trying to be invisible while doing his job. George watched this unfold with satisfaction. He had learned from his parents and grandparents that leadership wasn't about giving orders or demanding obedience. Real leadership was about inspiring others to care for each other and creating an environment where people felt valued and supported. James Mitchell felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt truly seen and cared for. The young prince's gentle persistence had broken through the walls he had built around his professional life. As he looked into George's concerned eyes, the guard realized that continuing to pretend everything was fine would be dishonest to someone who was showing him such genuine kindness. You know what, Your Highness? James said, his voice growing stronger despite his physical weakness. You're absolutely right. I haven't been feeling well, and I think I do need to sit down. A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the gathered palace staff. Mrs. Williams immediately hurried away to fetch a chair, while another staff member went to get water and something for James to eat. The efficiency with which everyone moved showed how much they cared about their colleagues' well-being. Prince George beamed with satisfaction, but his concern remained evident. Thank you for listening, he said to James. Sometimes grown-ups think they have to be strong all the time. But even the strongest people need help sometimes. As they waited for the chair to arrive, James found himself opening up in a way that surprised him. I've been having chest pains and feeling dizzy for a few days now, he admitted. But I was afraid that if I called in sick, I might lose my job or be seen as unreliable. George's young face showed confusion at this admission. But why would anyone think you're unreliable for being sick? People can't help getting sick. My father says that taking care of yourself is part of being responsible. The simplicity of this logic highlighted how unnecessarily complicated James had made the situation in his own mind. Fear and pride had combined to create a problem where none needed to exist. The royal family had always been understanding about health issues among their staff, but James had been too worried to test that understanding. Mrs. Williams returned with a comfortable chair, which she placed in a spot where James could still maintain his watch but also rest properly. The positioning was thoughtful, allowing him to keep his dignity while accepting the help he needed. As James gratefully sat down, the relief on his face was immediate and obvious. Color began to return to his cheeks and his breathing became more regular. The simple act of taking weight off his feet and relaxing his rigid posture made an enormous difference to how he felt. "Better?" George asked, crouching down so he was at eye level with the seated guard. "Much better, Your Highness," James replied, and for the first time that morning, his smile was genuine and relaxed. "Thank you for caring enough to notice when I was struggling," George nodded seriously. "My grandmother says that the measure of a person isn't how they treat people who are important or powerful, but how they treat people who need help or kindness. I think that works both ways, though. It's also about accepting help when you need it." This wisdom coming from a 10-year-old impressed everyone who heard it. James realized he was witnessing something special, a young person who understood the deeper meanings of respect, duty, and human connection. Mrs. Williams appeared with a glass of water and some plain biscuits. "Here you are, James," she said warmly. "Nothing too heavy, just something to settle your stomach and give you a bit of energy." As James sipped the water, he felt not just physical relief but emotional healing as well. The fear and isolation he had been carrying for days began to lift. He looked around at the concerned faces of his colleagues and realized that he was part of a community that cared about him. "I think," James said slowly, "I should probably see a doctor about these symptoms. This morning has made me realize that ignoring them isn't helping anyone, least of all the people I'm supposed to be protecting." George nodded approvingly. "That's a really good idea, and until you're feeling completely better, maybe you should do easier duties or take some time off to get well." The suggestion came without any sense of judgment or criticism. Instead, it carried the tone of someone who genuinely wanted what was best for James's health and recovery. James felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized how much this young prince's intervention had meant to him. Not only had George potentially saved him from a medical emergency, but he had also restored James's faith in the kindness and compassion of the family he served. "Your Highness," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that in all my years of service, no one has ever shown me such personal kindness. You've reminded me what it means to be truly cared for." The profound impact of this moment was felt by everyone present. They were witnessing something rare and beautiful, genuine human connection transcending the boundaries of rank, age, and protocol. As James sat in the chair, feeling the physical relief wash over him, his mind began to process what had just happened. The kindness shown by Prince George had awakened something in him that had been dormant for too long. For years he had been so focused on being the perfect guard that he had forgotten he was also a human being with needs, feelings, and the right to be cared for. The young prince remained nearby, having missed his usual departure time for school. George seemed to understand that this moment was more important than keeping to schedules. His natural compassion told him that James needed continued support, not just a quick fix. "How long have you been working here?" George asked, settling down on the floor beside James's chair with the casual ease of a child who wasn't concerned about formal protocol. 15 years. "Your Highness," James replied, his voice growing stronger as he rested. "I started when I was 25, fresh out of the military. This has been my whole adult life, really." George's eyes widened with interest. 15 years. You've been protecting my family since before I was born. That's amazing." The boy paused thoughtfully. "But in all that time, did you ever take time off when you were sick?" The question hit James like a gentle punch to the heart. As he thought about it, he realized that he had rarely taken sick days, even when he probably should have. He had always pushed through minor illnesses, believing that dedication meant never showing weakness. "Not very often," James admitted. "I always felt like I had to be strong and reliable. I thought that was what being a good guard meant. But you are strong and reliable," George said with the matter-of-fact certainty that children possess. "Taking care of yourself so you can do your job well is part of being reliable. If you got really sick because you didn't rest when you needed to, that wouldn't be reliable at all." Mrs. Williams, who had been listening to this conversation while organizing other staff duties, approached them with a gentle smile. "James, dear," she said, "the young prince is absolutely right. In all my years here, I've seen that the royal family values people who take good care of themselves. They want their staff to be happy and healthy." As James continued to rest and think, he found himself reflecting on his life in a way he hadn't done in years. The prince's simple act of kindness had opened a door in his heart that had been closed for too long. He began to realize that his dedication to duty had somehow transformed into a fear of appearing human. "Your Highness," James said slowly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course," George replied, looking up at him with attentive eyes. "What made you notice that I wasn't feeling well?" "Other people walked past me this morning, but you were the only one who stopped." George considered this question seriously. "I think it's because I try to really look at people, not just see them. My mom taught me that everyone has feelings and problems, and sometimes people hide them because they think they have to. She says that if you pay attention, you can usually tell when someone needs help." The wisdom in these words struck everyone who heard them. Here was a child who had been taught to see beyond surfaces, to recognize the humanity in every person he encountered. It was a lesson that many adults never learned. James felt a profound shift happening inside him. The young prince's care had not just addressed his immediate physical distress, it had also healed something deeper. For the first time in years, he felt valued not just for what he could do, but for who he was as a person. "I think," James said quietly, "I need to make some changes in my life. Not just about seeing a doctor, but about how I think about my work and myself." Mrs. Williams nodded encouragingly. "That sounds very wise, James." As James sat there, surrounded by caring colleagues and looking into the concerned face of young Prince George, he came to a realization that surprised him. The incident this morning had shown him something crucial. He had been so afraid of losing his job that he had forgotten to truly live his life. "Your Highness," James said, his voice becoming more decisive, "I think I need to take some time off to get properly healthy. And I need to think about what I really want from my life." George smiled broadly. "That sounds like a really good plan. And you know what? When you come back, if you come back, you'll be even better at protecting us because you'll be taking good care of yourself." The phrase "if you come back" hung in the air. James realized that the boy had unconsciously given him permission to consider all his options, including the possibility that his future might lie elsewhere. As he sat there, feeling cared for and supported, James made a decision that would change his life forever. The kindness of a 10-year-old prince had shown him that there was more to life than just duty and fear, and he was ready to explore what that might mean. James Mitchell sat in that chair for what felt like both an eternity and just a few precious moments. The water and biscuits had helped his physical symptoms, but more importantly, the kindness surrounding him had begun to heal wounds in his spirit that he hadn't even realized were there. As he looked around at the faces of his colleagues and down at Prince George, who was still sitting on the floor beside him, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. "Your Highness," James said, his voice steady and calm, "I need to tell you something, and I want to be completely honest with you." George looked up expectantly, his young face serious but trusting. The other palace staff members, sensing the importance of this moment, moved closer but remained respectfully quiet. "This morning, your kindness saved me from something much worse than just feeling unwell," James continued, "but it also made me realize some hard truths about my life. I've been so focused on being the perfect guard that I forgot to be a complete person." Mrs. Williams placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder, offering silent support as he found his words. "I've been living in fear," James admitted, looking directly at Prince George. "Fear of losing my job, fear of appearing weak, fear of admitting that I have needs and feelings just like everyone else. Your kindness this morning showed me that living in fear isn't really living at all." George nodded thoughtfully. "My father says that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." These words resonated deeply with James. He realized that the bravest thing he could do right now was to be honest about his needs and his future. "Your Highness, I've decided that I need to resign from my position," James said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Not because I don't care about your family or because I don't believe in the work, but because I need to take proper care of my health and figure out what I really want to do with my life." A gasp went through the small group of palace staff. Resignations were rare, especially from guards who had served faithfully for so many years. But James felt a sense of peace with his decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Prince George was quiet for a moment, processing what James had said. Then, with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to him, the boy stood up and looked James directly in the eyes. "I'm sad that you won't be here anymore," George said honestly, "but I'm happy that you're choosing to take care of yourself. That's what people who care about you would want you to do." The simplicity and acceptance in the young prince's response moved James to tears. Here was a child who understood that sometimes loving someone meant supporting their decisions, even when those decisions meant they would go away. "Will you be okay?" George asked with genuine concern. "Do you have family to take care of you while you get better?" James smiled through his tears. "I have a wife and 2 children," he said. "I think they'll be very happy to have me home and healthy instead of working when I'm sick." "That's good," George said with relief. "Families should take care of each other." Mrs. Williams stepped forward. "James, are you certain about this decision? There's no pressure to decide right now. You could take medical leave and think it over." James appreciated her concern, but he knew his mind was made up. "I'm certain," he said. "This morning has shown me that I've been living my life in a way that wasn't good for me, or for the people who depend on me. I need to make changes, and the first change is putting my health and my family first." The gathered staff members nodded with understanding. They could see the peace and resolution in James's face, and they recognized that this was not a decision made in haste or distress, but one made with careful consideration and newfound self-awareness. Prince George reached out and gently took James's hand. "Thank you for taking such good care of us for so long," the boy said. "And thank you for teaching me something important today, too." "What did I teach you?" James asked, curious. "You taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is help them be brave enough to take care of themselves," George replied. The profundity of this observation amazed everyone present. This young prince had not only shown remarkable compassion in recognizing James's distress, but he had also learned from the experience and understood its deeper meaning. James squeezed George's small hand gently. "And you taught me that real strength comes from accepting help and caring for yourself, not from pretending to be invincible." In that moment, both the guard and the prince had learned something valuable from each other, creating a connection that would last far beyond James's time at the palace. 3 weeks later, James Mitchell stood outside the gates of Kensington Palace. But this time he wasn't wearing a uniform. He was dressed in casual clothes, looking healthier and more relaxed than he had in years. In his hand he carried a small wrapped package and a letter. The doctor had confirmed what James had suspected. He had been experiencing the early signs of a serious heart condition that could have become dangerous if left untreated. The stress of pushing through illness while maintaining his demanding job had made everything worse. Taking time off and getting proper medical care had quite literally saved his life, but more than his physical health had improved. James had spent the past 3 weeks rediscovering parts of himself that had been buried under years of rigid duty. He had remembered that he enjoyed reading, that he loved spending time with his children, and that he had always harbored a secret dream of becoming a teacher. As he approached the palace entrance, James was greeted warmly by his former colleagues. Word of his recovery had spread throughout the staff, and everyone was genuinely happy to see him looking so well. "James," called Mrs. Williams from across the courtyard, "you look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in years," James replied honestly. "Taking time to heal was the best decision I ever made." He had come today for a specific purpose, to thank Prince George personally and to bring him a gift. The palace staff had arranged for a brief informal meeting, understanding the special bond that had formed between the guard and the young prince. When George appeared, his face lit up with joy at seeing James looking so healthy and happy. The boy rushed over, his usual royal composure giving way to genuine excitement. "Mr. James," George exclaimed, "you look so much better. Are you feeling all well now?" "I am, Your Highness, thanks to you," James replied, kneeling down to be at George's eye level. "I came to thank you properly and to give you something." James handed George the wrapped package and the letter. "The letter is for your parents, to thank them for understanding about my resignation and for the way they've always treated their staff with such kindness." George carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a simple wooden box with an inscription on it. The boy read aloud, To Prince George, who taught me that the greatest strength is knowing when to ask for help. Thank you for your kindness. From your friend, James. Inside the box was a small carved wooden heart. I made this myself, James explained. I've been learning woodworking in my free time. It's to remind you that caring about people is the most important job anyone can have. George held the wooden heart carefully, understanding the significance of the gift. It's beautiful, he said softly. I'll keep it always. I also wanted to tell you something exciting, James continued. I've decided to become a teacher. I'm going to start training next month to teach children about history and citizenship. I realized that your kindness that morning didn't just help me. It taught me something about how to help others. George's eyes widened with excitement. That's wonderful. You'll be a really good teacher because you care about people. Mrs. Williams, who had been watching this exchange with tears in her eyes, stepped forward. James has also started a support group for palace staff, she added proudly. He's helping other people understand that it's okay to ask for help when they need it. This news pleased George enormously. The boy understood that his simple act of kindness had created ripples that were now helping many other people. Your Highness, James said, I want you to know that what you did that morning changed my whole life. You didn't just help me when I was sick. You reminded me what it means to be human and to care for each other. George thought about this seriously. I think you helped me too, he said finally. You showed me that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is just notice when someone needs help and be brave enough to offer it. As their visit came to an end, James and George shook hands like old friends. The former guard looked at the young prince with deep respect and affection. Thank you, Your Highness, for seeing me as a person that day, not just as a guard. It made all the difference. Thank you, Mr. James, for teaching me that helping people is the best way to use any power you have, George replied. As James walked away from the palace for the last time as a former employee, he felt a sense of completion and new beginning. The young prince's kindness had not only saved his health, it had restored his faith in human connection and given him the courage to pursue a life filled with purpose and joy. Meanwhile, Prince George kept the wooden heart in his pocket, as a reminder of the day he learned that true leadership means caring for others, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change someone's entire life. The lesson would stay with him forever, shaping the kind of person and eventual leader he would become. The story of their encounter became quietly legendary among palace staff, passed down as an example of how genuine care and compassion could transform lives and create lasting bonds that transcended all boundaries of rank and protocol.